We don't forgive murderers. Council's faces went dark. The data chip was the size of a thumbnail, and no one in the chamber noticed when she touched it. That was the point. Ambassador Cashin Voss sat in the smallest chair in the conquered hall of Stelovec Station and watched 38 civilizations vote to surrender. She kept her hands folded. She kept her face clear. The Allery delegate 2 seats to her left was crying, small silver-furred shoulders shaking, wet eyes fixed on the holographic display where 3 star systems had just turned red. The Torvan delegate, massive and sick-eyed and ancient, was speaking in the measured tones of someone who had already made his peace with the outcome. The Chinari cluster mind rippled through 7 shades of gray in rapid succession, which its translation unit rendered as, "This is unfortunate but necessary." Cashin did not move. She had not moved in 40 minutes. The data chip sat in her pocket like a stone. 3 days ago, the Dravelin Dominion had issued an ultimatum. 7 days to cede 3 council-protected systems: the Allery home world, the Dren collective habitat, and the human colonies of New Haven and Shenzhen 4, or face total military action. The Council had called an emergency session within the hour. In the history of the Galactic Council, that signal had fired 8 times. The first 7 times, a civilization had ceased to exist before the session ended. This was the 8th. High Arbiter Sareth stood at the chamber's center platform, 4 arms folded, golden compound eyes tracking the room. He was 340 years old. He had survived 3 wars, 2 plagues, and 1 attempted internal coup. Cashin had never once seen him look afraid. He looked afraid now. "Stay with us," the narrator says quietly. "What you're about to hear is the story of what happened next, and I'll warn you now. It does not go the way anyone in that room expected." On the holographic display above the chamber floor, a replay of the Makaran bombardment ran on a silent loop. 3 hours of orbital fire, a planet that had harbored 4 billion people, schoolchildren, engineers, farmers, the entire ordinary weight of a civilization burning in real time. The Council had watched it twice already. Some were still watching. Cashin was not watching. She was looking at Sareth's hands. His lower 2 arms, normally steady, were gripping the edge of the platform. His fingers had gone pale at the tips. She had studied enough alien body language in 5 years at this table to know what that meant. He had already decided. He was waiting for the right moment to announce what had already been chosen. The vote came faster than she expected. "The position of the Galactic Council," Sareth said, and even through the translation layer his voice had lost its usual resonance, "is that negotiation with the Dravelin Dominion is the only path that avoids further civilizational loss. The motion before us is immediate diplomatic engagement, with the understanding that territorial concession may be required." He did not say will be required. He did not need to. The lights on the voting console came up green, one by one, then in clusters, then in a wave. 38 green lights, 4 dark, Earth, and 3 smaller species with nowhere else to turn. Cashin stood. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when the person who speaks last, and least finally, opens their mouth. "Earth requires 48 hours before formal position," she said. "We will address the Council at that time. No anger, no plea, no trembling." She kept her voice in the same register she used to order lunch. Sareth's golden eyes held hers for a moment longer than comfortable. Then he nodded. Protocol allowed it. She was a junior representative from a junior species, and protocol allowed her 48 hours, and in the mathematics of 38 green lights, 48 hours was nothing. It was a courtesy. It was the table waiting politely while someone younger finished chewing. She picked up her case, walked out of the conquered hall, and did not look back. The debate continued behind her. No one watched her go. 41 hours earlier, Fort Olympus had received a 2-word transmission. Blackthorn active. The installation sat inside a hollowed-out asteroid at the far edge of Earth's solar system, beyond the ice fields, beyond any orbital detection range. From outside, it looked like frozen rock. From inside, it looked like the most expensive secret in human history. Admiral Karen Moss had been standing at the edge of a frozen lake in northern Canada, watching snow fall when the message reached him. He was 58 years old. He had been trying, with limited success, to stop thinking about his daughter for 3 consecutive weeks. The lake helped, not much, but some. The phone chimed once. He read 2 words. He put the phone back in his pocket and stood very still for a moment, watching the snow. Then he walked to his car and did not look at the lake again. By the time his shuttle landed on Fort Olympus's frozen surface, the installation was already alive. Cold light poured from every docking bay. Crews moved through corridors in the particular fast, silent way of people who have drilled for a moment and cannot quite believe it has arrived. Moss walked through the main airlock, and the temperature dropped 6 degrees and the smell hit him. Recycled air, machine oil, the faint mineral edge of filtered water that had been cycling through the same system for 20 years. Dr. Shen Zhao was waiting at the inner door. She was 51, small, with close-cut gray hair and glasses she did not medically need. She said they helped her think. Moss had never questioned it. "How long since activation?" he asked. 30 minutes. All 4,000 are already running pre-launch diagnostics. He absorbed that. 4,000. Even knowing the number, hearing it said plainly in a corridor still did something to his chest. "Walk me through it," he said. She walked him through it. The phalanx, that was the name the original architects had given it, an old word from a military dialect that had been dead for a century, meaning the edge held in reserve, had been under construction for 130 years across 17 separate orbital facilities disguised as mining operations, research stations, and asteroid survey posts. Every human government in that stretch of time had known. Every single one, across wars and collapses and reconstruction and change, had agreed to continue. They had kept the secret with a discipline that Moss found almost harder to believe than the fleet itself. But he had seen what happened to species that couldn't. They reached the observation deck. Zhao touched the panel and the blast shutters rolled back. Moss stood at the glass and looked out at the docking bays below, and for a moment he did not breathe. Row after row of ships, stretching far enough that the far end vanished into the chamber's artificial dark. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and at the back, the shapes that made everything else look small, dreadnoughts, each one 3 kilometers of dark metal and weapons systems, and the accumulated answer to a question humanity had been quietly asking for a century and a quarter. What do we do if the galaxy decides we are expendable? The answer had taken 130 years to build. It was sitting in those cradles right now, running diagnostics, engines warming. "The Mark 7 inventory?" he asked. Zhao took her glasses off and cleaned them with her sleeve, which she did when she was choosing words carefully. 12,000 warheads. Each one generates a localized gravitational singularity, 4 seconds, 200 kilometers effective radius. She put the glasses back on. Nothing inside that radius survives. The number sat in the air between them. Moss looked at the ships. He thought about his daughter. He thought about a planet with 4 billion people on it that had burned in 3 hours while the Galactic Council held a discussion. He thought about 20 million human colonists on New Haven and Shenzhen 4 who were probably waking up right now, making breakfast, sending their children to school. "If they don't stand down," he said. "If we have to use it." "Corvaxis," Zhao said. 11 billion. He nodded once. He did not ask the follow-up question. He already knew the answer, and so did she, and saying it out loud would not make the weight of it any lighter or any heavier. "Hope isn't a strategy," he said quietly. "No," Zhao agreed, "but it's what we're hoping for anyway." Below them, the fleet waited in its cradles. Cold, patient, enormous. It had been waiting for 130 years, and it could wait a little longer. Moss turned from the glass and walked back toward the command center. He had 41 hours. He needed to think clearly, and he needed to not think about the photograph on his desk, and he was not going to manage either one completely. But he was going to try. On Stelivec Station, in a small observation room off the main corridor, Cassian Voss sat alone and looked at the stars. The station was ancient, built by a species that had been dead for 6,000 years, its crystalline walls still faintly warm to the touch, as if the builders had left only recently. She had always found that comforting before, Tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like a warning about what happened to civilizations that ran out of time. She had 47 hours and 12 minutes. She set the data chip on the table in front of her. It caught the light from the observation window, a pinprick of reflection, small and still and entirely unremarkable looking. She had been carrying it for 5 years. Not this specific chip. The original had been transferred 3 times as security protocols changed, but the information on it, she had been carrying that for her entire career at this table. 60 years of surveillance. Every Dravelin military position, every supply route, every communication code, every defense grid, fleet patrol pattern, and weapon specification, gathered in secret by human deep space intelligence assets that had never once been detected. The Dravelin were thorough in conquest. They were not thorough in looking behind them. She picked up the chip and held it between 2 fingers, looking at it the way you look at a thing you have carried so long it has become part of your body weight, and you only notice it when you put it down. 47 hours. She set it back on the table, picked up a glass of water, and did not drink it. The war room on Corvaxis smelled of burning stone. That was the first thing any visitor noticed about the capital, Drevnok, carved directly into the black mountains of the home world, every chamber and corridor cut from volcanic rock. The fire globes that lit the High Command's inner sanctum burned orange, suspended in containment fields, and the heat they gave off was dry and close and constant. Warlord Keth Varn had spent 40 years making decisions in this room. He found the heat clarifying. Tonight it was not helping. General Corvus stood at the main display, his single remaining arm folded behind his back, studying the sensor data with the careful skepticism of a man who had survived 40 years of war by not trusting anything he could not hold in his hand. Projections, he said. Sensor illusions. The humans have a patrol fleet same as every junior species. This is theater. Keth Varn said nothing. He was looking at the energy signatures on the readout, not the numbers. He had already decided the numbers were real. He was looking at the shape of the data, the way the readings were organized, the spacing, the formation geometry. Something was wrong with the numbers, and he could not yet say what. Play the border engagement again, he said. The display shifted. A tactical recording, taken from the sensor logs of the Dravelin cruiser Korithval 14 hours ago. 3 of his cruisers had encountered a small human patrol group near the edge of the contested corridor. Standing orders. Engage and push back. Demonstrate reach. Remind the junior species where the border actually was. The engagement had lasted 9 seconds. Varn watched it the way he watched everything without expression, cataloging. His cruisers had opened fire first. Accurate fire. Clean targeting solutions. 3 human ships, each one a fraction of the size of a Dravelin cruiser, should have been debris in 2 seconds. Instead, they moved. Not fast, not frantically, just precisely. Each ship was somewhere other than where the fire arrived, as if the targeting solutions had been calculated wrong, as if the humans had known where every shot was going before it was fired. Then the human ships returned fire. The Korithval vanished. Not destroyed, there was no explosion, no debris field, no expanding cloud of metal and atmosphere. One frame it was there, the next there was only a brief distortion in space, a ripple in the light, and then nothing. The same for the second cruiser. The third lasted 6 seconds longer, long enough to transmit 1 line of emergency data. Gravity anomaly, ship integrity. Then it was gone too. That is not a sensor illusion, Fleet Commander Zella said quietly from the far end of the table. She was the youngest general in the room. Varn had promoted her 18 months ago because she was the only one who consistently told him things he did not want to hear. That is a weapons system we have no record of, not in our databases, not in Council intelligence, not anywhere. Corvus turned. Then the databases are incomplete. Every species claims weapons they don't have. It's the oldest. Pull the spectral analysis, Zella said, of the anomaly zone where the Korithval was. Corvus pulled it. The room went quiet. The spectral data showed a gravitational event of a kind that did not occur naturally. A localized singularity, 4 seconds, perfectly contained, then gone. Whatever had been inside the radius was gone with it, not scattered. not burned, simply removed from existence, as if the universe had reached down and rubbed out a mark. General Corvus sat down. He did not speak again for several minutes. Varn studied the data. He thought about the 6 species he had conquered. He thought about the negotiations that had always preceded conquest, the posturing, the threats, the careful back and forth of 2 forces testing each other's actual reach. Every species, without exception, had overstated their capability early. It was standard. It was expected. It was how this worked. The humans had not overstated anything. They had understated everything, for 130 years. "Show me the dossier," he said. "The full intelligence package." Zella placed it on the display. It took several seconds to load because it was enormous. Fleet positions, supply routes, defense grids, communication codes, personnel files, the location of every Dravelin military installation in 6 systems, mapped with a precision that should have been impossible for an external observer, patrol schedules accurate to the hour, weapons specifications that included details the Dravelin High Command had classified at the highest level. Not approximate, not estimated, exact. "They have been watching us," Varn said. The words came out flat, without inflection, because he was using the tone he used when he was deciding what to do next and did not yet know. "For how long?" Zella pulled up the oldest date stamp in the file. 63 years. The fire globes crackled. No one spoke. The heat in the room was the same as it had always been, but something had changed in how it felt. Every general at that table had built their entire military thinking on a single foundational certainty. The Dravelin were the ones who watched. The Dravelin were the ones who chose the moment. The Dravelin came when they were ready, and the other species were never ready. That certainty had just collapsed. And then Zella said the thing that no one else was willing to say. "They're not at the border. Their fleet isn't positioned at the transit corridor." She pulled up the sensor overlay. "They are at the edge of Dravelin space, not our military bases, not our forward installations." She paused. "Corvaxis. The home world. 11 billion people." Varn stared at the display. The human fleet, 4,000 ships, confirmed now, real now, sat at the edge of weapons range of everything that made the Dravelin Dominion what it was. Not positioned to defend, not positioned to deter, positioned to end. The room understood what this meant. The predator had been circled. The hunter had been hunted, quietly, patiently, for longer than most of the generals in this room had been alive. Keth Varn looked at the display for a long time. Outside, the black mountains of Corvaxis were dark against a darker sky. Inside, the fire globes burned. He said nothing. He was calculating, and the calculation kept coming out the same way, and he kept running it again because the result was one he had never, in 40 years, had to consider. Cashin Voss slept for 4 hours. She had trained herself to do that, to find the still point inside the noise and rest, because she had learned early that decisions made on no sleep carried a particular kind of error. She woke before her alarm, made tea she actually drank this time, and stood at the window of her quarters looking out at the stars that passed beyond the station's crystal hull. Then she picked up the chip and walked back to the conquered hall. It was empty at this hour. The chamber breathed environmental systems cycling, the faint hum of life support for dozens of different atmospheric zones. She walked to the junior seat and sat down. She placed her hands flat on the table in front of her. She did not rehearse what she was going to say. She had been rehearsing it, in one form or another, for 5 years. When the session began 2 hours later and the delegates filed in, the Torvon massive and deliberate, the Chinari clustermind flowing into its tank, the Alari delegate who had cried before now sitting with her eyes fixed carefully forward, as if she had decided that breaking down twice would cost something she could not afford. Cashin sat in her chair and watched them arrive. High Arbiter Sareth took his platform. His translator unit clicked on. His golden eyes found Cashin and held there for just a moment before moving to the room. "Earth has the floor," he said. She stood. She placed the chip in the console. The holographic display above the chamber floor lit up, and then it kept lighting up, and then it became something that filled the entire space above the delegates' heads, a vast, layered map of information that organized itself in real time, pulling from the chip's contents and projecting them outward in every direction. Fleet positions, supply routes, defense grids, communication codes. The Dravelin military intelligence, complete and undeniable, laid out for every species in the room to read. The Torvan delegate leaned forward. His 6 eyes tracked the data. His lower jaw moved once and stopped. The Chinari cluster mind changed color, from its usual gray to a pale, translucent white that its translation unit had no word for. Zoreth's forearms dropped to his sides. His upper hands fell open, a gesture Cassian had never seen from him before. The Allery delegate stopped blinking. Cassian let the silence sit for exactly 12 seconds. She had counted it out in advance. Earth has been observing the Dravelin Dominion for 63 years, she said. Every fleet movement, every weapons test, every strategic plan. We have not shared this information with the Council because we were not certain it would matter. We are now certain. She paused. We also want to show you something else. She touched a second control on the console. The intelligence display reorganized itself. The maps and data condensed to one side of the chamber. The other side opened into a live feed from deep space. Stars. Then the stars began to disappear. Not all at once. One by one, then in groups, blocked out by shapes moving through the frame. Dark shapes running silent, no identification lights. They kept coming, wave after wave of them, filling the transmission frame until the background stars were just points of light between hulls. The chamber erupted. The Torvan delegate stood, knocking his chair back. The Allery delegate's mouth opened and stayed open. 3 species atmospheric tanks vented excess pressure simultaneously, the environmental equivalent of a sharp, involuntary breath. Zoreth's translator clicked and produced no sound, because there was apparently no standard phrase in galactic diplomatic language for what was happening on the display. Cassian raised her voice by exactly the amount required to be heard over the noise. The Phalanx, 4,000 human warships currently positioned at the edge of Dravelin space, armed, at full readiness, awaiting instruction. Then she looked directly at the holographic link at the far end of the chamber, the transmission point where warlord Keth Varn was watching from Corvaxis. He had joined the session confident. She had read him correctly. He wanted to watch the surrender in person. He had sat in his carved bone chair with the lazy weight of a man who already knew the outcome. He was not sitting that way now. His amber eyes were fixed on the fleet display. The lazy certainty had left his face completely. What replaced it was something that took Cassian a moment to identify, because she had not expected to see it there. It was the specific expression of a predator who has just realized it is the prey. Not fear, not yet. Something worse than fear, because fear at least carries the possibility of escape. This was the look of a calculation completing itself, running the numbers, and finding that the numbers only come out one way. Cassian spoke 5 words into the silence of the chamber. We don't negotiate with predators. The holographic link held. Keth Varn did not move. His amber eyes stayed on the fleet display, on the ships that were blocking out his stars, and behind them the planet that held everyone he had ever conquered for, and she watched his face and said nothing else. The counter-ultimatum came before Varn could speak. Cassian touched the console again and the fleet display expanded, filling the chamber from floor to ceiling. 4,000 ships rendered in perfect detail, each one a dark shape against the stars that were no longer visible behind them. She let the delegates look at it for 3 full seconds. Then she spoke. Earth's position is as follows. The Dravelin Dominion will withdraw from all 3 conquered systems, the Allery home world, the Dren collective habitat, New Haven and Shenzhen 4, full withdrawal, all personnel, all equipment, all installations, 72 hours, unconditional, non-negotiable. The chamber was so quiet that the environmental hum was audible. The soft cycling of atmospheric processors handling 42 different breathing requirements simultaneously. If the Dominion does not comply, the Phalanx will advance. We will not stop at your military installations. We will come for Corvaxis. She looked at Varn's holographic image. His amber eyes had not moved from the fleet display. 72 hours, warlord. Then she sat down, picked up the glass of water she had carried in with her and drank it, slowly, completely, set the empty glass on the table. No one spoke for a long time. Sarath was the first. His translator clicked through several cycles before producing anything coherent, which told Cashin more about his internal state than any expression could. Ambassador Voss. His voice came out careful and precise, the way someone speaks when they are choosing each word as if the wrong one might break something. The council requires clarification. The phalanx, this fleet, it has been armed and positioned without council knowledge, without council authorization. This is a unilateral military action by a member species, which under the charter is permitted, Cashin said, when a member species and its allies face active military threat, Article 11, which the Council ratified 900 years ago and has not once invoked on behalf of a junior species. She looked at him steadily. We invoked it ourselves. The Torvan delegate made a sound that his translation unit rendered as a long, low note, something between acknowledgement and dread. The Chinari clustermind had gone entirely white. It had been white since the fleet appeared on screen. It had not changed back. Sarath looked at Cashin for a moment that lasted several seconds too long. Then he looked at the fleet display, still filling the upper half of the chamber. Then he looked back at her. How long? He asked. It was not a diplomatic question. It was a real one, the question of a person who has just discovered a door in a room he thought he knew perfectly. The construction began 130 years ago, Cashin said. The first ships were laid down the same year Earth joined this council. Sarath's lower arms moved, another gesture she had never seen from him, both hands turning outward, palms up. In his species, she knew it meant something close to, I have no answer for this. You were building it when you took your seat, he said. Yes. All this time. You were here, listening, learning. Watching, she said. Yes. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. The earlier silence had been shock. This one was something more complicated. The specific discomfort of 41 species recalculating every interaction they had ever had with the quiet junior representative from the blue planet. Warlord Varn had still not spoken. His holographic image sat perfectly still, amber eyes now fixed on Cashin rather than the fleet. She could not read his expression. She had studied Dravelin body language for 5 years and she could still not read it with certainty, but she could read the stillness. The stillness was real. The confidence was gone. On Corvaxis, General Zella was the one who finally said what everyone in the war room was thinking. We cannot win this engagement. Corvus looked at her. He did not argue. He looked older than he had an hour ago, which Cashin would not have thought possible. Our fleet outnumbers theirs, said one of the younger generals. Cashin did not know his name, only his rank. Only that he would not have survived long enough to learn his name if things had gone differently. Numerically, Zella said, yes, but we watched 3 cruisers disappear in 9 seconds. Their weapons don't destroy ships, they remove them, and they're not at the transit corridor, they're at Corvaxis. She said it again because she needed the room to actually hear it. Corvaxis, 11 billion people, and we cannot get our own fleet repositioned inside 72 hours. Not from where they currently are. The young general went quiet. Varn stood. He walked to the viewport, the wide strip of reinforced glass that looked out over Drevnok, the Black Mountain capital, the carved stone city that had been the heart of his civilization for 1,000 years. Below him, the city's lights moved in the ordinary patterns of an ordinary night. Vehicles, people, the small, specific weight of a place that did not know what was being decided in the room above it. He thought about conquest. He thought about what he had always believed conquest was, the expression of strength, the natural result of capability meeting will. He had never questioned the logic. It was the logic the galaxy ran on. The strong pressed forward, the weak negotiated or died. That was the order of things, the way it had always been, the way it would always be. He looked at the city. He thought about 11 billion people who were home right now, not thinking about him. Not thinking about the fleet sitting at the edge of their sky. He thought about the human ambassador sitting in the smallest chair, who had looked at him without blinking and offered him exactly 2 options. He thought about what the humans had done. Not the fleet. He understood the fleet now. He understood the capability. He understood the strategic logic. What he could not stop thinking about was the restraint. 130 years of it. The capacity to build that fleet and then not use it. To sit in the smallest seat and watch and wait while other species were conquered and traded away and erased. And to not act until the moment action was the only remaining option. He had never understood restraint. He had always read it as weakness. He was beginning to think he had been wrong about that. He turned from the viewport. "Open a private channel," he said. "Not the council link, direct to Fort Olympus." Admiral Moss was at the viewport when the transmission request came in. He had been standing there for 3 hours, not because there was anything useful to see, but because standing felt better than sitting, and moving felt better than standing, and there was nowhere to move to. The bridge was quiet. His crew had been running on combat alert status for 36 hours. They were trained for it. They could hold it longer. But trained endurance and actual endurance were different things, and he could see it in the set of their shoulders. The way conversation had dropped off in the last few hours to almost nothing. "Sir," Captain Chen's voice. "Incoming transmission, encrypted, point of origin Corvaxis." Moss turned from the viewport, put it through. The display opened. Warlord Keth Varn appeared full resolution, no compression artifacts, which meant Varn had used his highest bandwidth channel. The Warlord's amber eyes were steady. His bone-carved armor caught the light from the fire globes behind him. He looked, Moss thought, like a man who had spent the last several hours making a decision he did not want to make and had finally made it. "Admiral," Varn said, "Warlord, I want to understand something before I give my answer to your ambassador." He paused. "Your fleet is at Corvaxis, not at our military positions, not at our forward bases. You chose the home world." "Yes," Moss said. "That is not a defensive posture. That is annihilation." "It is a choice," Moss said. "We made it so you would understand that we are serious." Varn was quiet for a moment. "You would do it. If we don't comply, you would actually fire." Moss looked at the warlord's face. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the Macaron. He thought about 20 million people on 2 colonies who were going to school and making breakfast and living their ordinary lives, while he stood here deciding whether to end the most feared empire in the quadrant. "I hope we don't have to find out," he said. It was not the answer Varn had expected. Moss could see that clearly, the small shift in the warlord's expression, the slight tension around the eyes that meant he had prepared for a different response, and this one had landed somewhere he had not anticipated. "You hope," Varn said. "Yes." Another silence, longer. "Your ambassador said you built the fleet so that others wouldn't die because the galaxy was too afraid to say no." Varn's voice had changed register slightly, not softer exactly, but stripped of something. The performance layer. Was that true, or was that a speech? Moss did not hesitate. "It was true when we built the first ship, and it's true right now. We are not here for Dravelin territory. We are not here for revenge. If you withdraw, we go home. That's the whole offer." The fire globes behind Varn crackled. The warlord looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "What you are describing is a species that built the capacity to conquer the galaxy and chose not to." "Yes," Moss said. "Why?" "Because we'd just be the next empire, and the galaxy has enough of those." The transmission ended without a formal conclusion. No agreement stated, no timeline confirmed, just Varn's image cutting to black, and the bridge returning to its quiet hum, and Moss standing with his hand on the console looking at a dark screen. "Sir," Chen's voice was careful, "was that?" "I don't know yet," Moss said. He walked to his desk. He picked up the photograph. His daughter Sarah, forever 24, caught in the specific kind of moment that photographs always caught, not the important one, just an ordinary afternoon. She was laughing at something off camera, something small and forgotten, something that had not seemed worth remembering at the time. He set the photograph face down, not because he wanted to stop seeing her, because he needed to think, and he could not think clearly when she was looking at him. He had 35 hours left in the window. 35 hours to find out whether the most feared warlord in the quadrant had calculated the same thing Moss had, or whether the calculation came out differently on his side of the line. He walked back to the viewport. The fleet was out there, 4,000 ships, weapons armed, waiting in perfect formation, waiting for an order that would either send them home or send them forward. He put his hand flat on the glass. The cold came through immediately, the deep cold of space on the other side of a pane that was the only thing between the warmth of the bridge and a vacuum that went on forever. He thought about 11 billion people on a planet that had done nothing to him personally. He thought about 20 million people on 2 colonies who had done nothing to Varn personally. He thought about restraint, about what it cost, about what it was for. Then he thought 35 hours. And somewhere in the dark between his fleet and Corvaxis, the clock kept running. The answer came at hour 41. Not through the council link, not through any official diplomatic channel. A single encrypted transmission direct to Stelovec Station, addressed to Ambassador Cashin Voss. 4 words. The Dominion accepts terms. She read it twice. She was sitting in the observation room off the main corridor, the same room she had used the night before the session, the stars passing slowly beyond the crystal hull. She had a cup of tea this time. She read the message, set the data chip on the table, the same chip, or close enough, and looked at the stars. She did not feel relief. She had expected that she would, and she did not. What she felt instead was a kind of quiet weight, the specific heaviness of a thing that has been carried so long that setting it down does not feel like freedom. It just feels like less. She picked up the tea, she drank it. Then she sent one word back to Fort Olympus. Confirmed it. Admiral Moss received it standing at his desk. He read it standing. He stayed standing for a moment after he finished, because sitting felt wrong for some reason he could not entirely explain. All stations, he said. His voice came out steady. It surprised him a little. Stand down weapons. All ships maintain position. We hold formation until withdrawal is confirmed on the ground. The bridge did not cheer. It never did. This crew was too old for that, too practiced, too aware of what it had taken to get here and what it would cost to stay. But he heard it in the small sounds. A breath released, a hand unclenching from a console edge, 2 officers exchanging a look that carried everything they were not going to say out loud. He walked to his desk. He turned the photograph face up. Sarah, laughing at something off camera. 24 forever. The ordinary afternoon that had not seemed worth keeping at the time. He had carried this weight for 20 years. Not the fleet, not the command, but the specific weight of knowing that his daughter had died in something the council called a minor incident, in a corridor of space where the weak had been traded for the convenience of the strong. He had built the phalanx in part because of her, not for revenge. That had been important to him to understand early, because revenge and principle looked the same from the outside and were entirely different things from the inside. Not for revenge. For the next Sarah. For the person who would otherwise be 24 in a minor incident that the galaxy would decide was acceptable. He set the photograph back on the desk. He did not put it face down again. Dr. Zio, he said, opening the channel to Fort Olympus. Her voice came back immediately. She had been awake the whole time, he knew. She had not said so, but he knew. We didn't have to use them, he said. A pause, just one breath long. No, she said. We didn't. He heard something in her voice that he recognized because it was in his own chest at the same moment. Not joy, not triumph, something quieter and harder to name, the feeling of a door that has been held shut for a very long time, held by pure will against everything pressing from the other side, and now the pressure on the other side is gone, but the door is still closed, because you have been holding it so long you are not sure your hands know how to stop. Take care of the fleet, Admiral, she said. Bring them home. Copy that. He closed the channel. The withdrawal took 51 hours. Cashin watched confirmation feeds from the Council's observation network. The slow, deliberate reversal of the Dravelin advance. Ship by ship, installation by installation. The 3 red systems on the holographic display shifting to amber, and then to something that did not have a color yet, because the Council's system had not needed a color for return before. The Dren Collective Habitat sent a single transmission to the Council, 3 characters in their written language. which the translation system rendered as "sky is clear." From the Allery home world, nothing official, no message, no transmission. Sareth called a formal session on the 52nd hour. His voice, when he addressed the chamber, had recovered its usual steadiness. But something had changed underneath it. A tone Cassian could not precisely name, somewhere between gravity and humility, as if the 340-year-old arbitrator had discovered a thing about the galaxy he had not expected to discover at his age. "The Council acknowledges Earth's intervention," he said. "The immediate crisis is resolved. The question before this body is what Earth requires in return." He turned to her. She had been waiting. She stood. She did not reach for any notes. She did not need them. "One thing," she said, "a binding Council resolution, permanent and non-negotiable, that no member species of this body will ever again be offered to an aggressor as a concession. No home world surrendered, no population traded, no civilization handed over so that others can avoid a fight." She paused. "Let the room sit with it. This council has spent 10,000 years solving threats by deciding whose life is worth less than stability. We have a word for that. It is not diplomacy." She looked at the Torvan delegate, the Chinari clustermind, the species that had voted green without hesitation. "We will not be the species that gets sacrificed, and we will not stand here and watch you sacrifice anyone else. If this council is going to mean something, if it is going to be more than the place where the powerful decide how to divide the weak, then it needs one rule it cannot negotiate away." She sat down. Sareth looked at her for a long moment, then he turned to the chamber. "The motion is on the floor. All in favor." The lights came up green, one by one at first, then faster, then all at once, until every seat in the chamber burned the same color. 42 species, everyone. The Torvan, who had argued loudest for surrender. The Chinari, who had gone white with shock at the fleet reveal. Even the species who voted yes out of political calculation rather than genuine conviction, and Cassian was clear-eyed enough to know that some of them voted yes. The resolution passed. No, the room changed. The workers arrived the next morning. Cassian watched from the corridor as they dismantled the junior seat, carefully, because the furniture of Stelavec Station was ancient, and the council maintained it with the reverence of people who understood that the things built to last were rarer than the things built to impress. The seat came apart in pieces. The pieces were carried out. The new seat arrived in sections. Larger, heavier, dark metal, and something that was not quite wood, sourced from a species whose planet had trees that grew for centuries before they were harvested. It was positioned in the inner ring between the Torvan and the Chinari, where the older and larger civilization sat. She did not watch the installation. She had a report to file, and she sat in the corridor outside the conquered hall and wrote it on a tablet with a stylus the way she always had, the old way, the way that left a record that could not be remotely locked or access restricted or made to disappear. She had always done it that way. From her first week at Stelavec Station, she had never explained why. She finished the report. She set the stylus down. From inside the hall, she heard the workers finishing the soft sounds of assembly, of something being placed and secured. She stood and walked inside. The hall was empty except for the workers, who were packing their equipment and preparing to leave. The chamber's light fell on the new seat, larger than the one it replaced, solid, positioned in the inner ring where the votes carried weight and the voices carried further. One of the workers noticed her. He stopped what he was doing and stood straight. Then the other one did, and then slowly the third. They did not speak, they just stood. She looked at the seat for a moment, then she walked across the chamber floor and sat down in it. It fit differently than the small chair. The armrests were at the right height. The angle was different. She could see the whole chamber from here, not just her corner of it, and the difference was larger than she had expected. She had sat in the corner for 5 years and not known how much she was missing. The workers had not moved. She looked at them and they looked at her, and none of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying. On the Allery home world, a child came out of an underground shelter for the first time in 3 weeks. She was small, even for her species, silver-furred, with the wide eyes that Allery children had before they learned to hide them. She stepped out into pale sunlight and looked up at the sky. No ships, no fire, no sound except wind moving through what remained of the trees at the shelter's edge. "Are they gone?" she asked. Her mother was beside her. The mother had not slept in 11 days. She looked up at the same sky, the same pale light, and her voice came out very quiet. "Yes, they're gone. Who made them go?" The mother did not have a word in her own language for the species that had done it. Their language had words for many things, for the specific quality of light at dawn, for the weight of grief after a long illness, for the satisfaction of work finished well. It did not have a word for a species that had sat quietly in a corner for 130 years, building the means to end everything, and then used it only to ask for a law. She used the human word instead. "Humans," she said. The child turned it over, said it softly, the way you say a word you are hearing for the first time and want to keep. "Humans." The fleet came home in formation, 4,000 ships moving through dark space at half speed, weapons cold, running lights on for the first time in the transit. It took longer that way. Moss had ordered it deliberately. He wanted the crews to see each other. He wanted them to know they were not alone in the dark. He stood at the viewport for most of the journey. He was thinking about what Varn had said. "What you are describing is a species that built the capacity to conquer the galaxy and chose not to." And he was thinking about how strange it was, how genuinely strange, to have built something capable of ending civilizations, and to feel in this moment, most defined by the fact that it had never fired in anger. The phalanx would not be dismantled, he knew that. The galaxy had recalibrated, but recalibration was not trust, and trust was not safety, and safety was a thing that had to be maintained, not assumed. The ships would return to their cradles. The weapons would go cold. The crews would go home to families who had been told they were on extended survey missions. The secret would not stay secret anymore, but the fleet would stay ready. That was the cost. It was always going to be the cost, not the building, not the waiting, but the permanent weight of carrying something that large and never being able to put it down completely. You could stand down weapons. You could not stand down the knowledge of what you were willing to do if you had to. He had known that when he took the command. He would carry it until he didn't. He picked up the photograph. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight, which was the weight of paper and nothing more, and somehow also the weight of everything. He set it back on the desk, face up. On Stelovec Station in the Concord Hall, a session ended and the delegates filed out. The new seat stood in the inner ring. The old corner was empty now, just a gap in the arrangement of chairs that the environmental systems kept heating to the right temperature for human biology, out of habit, out of protocol, out of the assumption that whoever sat there mattered. Cashin was the last to leave. She stood at the chamber's edge for a moment, looking at the hall she had walked into 5 years ago as the youngest representative of the youngest species, carrying a chip in her pocket and a secret in her chest, and the specific patience of someone who knows exactly what they are waiting for. The light in the chamber shifted, the station's day cycle turning, the crystal walls catching something and scattering it across the floor in a way that lasted only a few seconds before it passed. She watched it pass. Then she walked out, and the hall went quiet behind her, and the new seat stood where it stood, and through the windows of Stelovec Station the stars moved the way they always moved, old and cold, and completely indifferent to whether the species below them were wise or foolish, restrained or not, afraid or ready. The stars did not care. That was the point. That had always been the point. The galaxy would have to.